Frederick Douglass was born a slave, but died an author, orator, and statesman. Such a drastic change is rarely seen, for such a change is only seen in the truly exceptional. In his autobiography, A Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave, Douglass identifies the turning point in his life, when he had resolved to escape his desperate plight, to the time in his childhood when he first learned to read. In learning to read, Douglass realized the hope of a freedom he would not have otherwise imagined. He discovered that there are many who did not support slavery, and resolved to flee in search of a new, better life. Douglass knew that with books comes freedom, with knowledge a hope for change. In literature there can be found both new and old ideas, ideas that can save a soul or move an army. That is why today I will proceed to argue that the New York Public Library system represents one of the most essential parts in what makes America both good and beautiful. I will give the problems in America's educational system today, show the reasons for these problems, and then propose my solution. The New York Public Library, like all libraries, represents the importance of literature in contemporary society. In preserving these institutions, the soul of America is preserved. The concept of a public library is a relatively recent one, drafted in America with the intention of creating a repository of knowledge available to the public for free. In libraries there can be found both the records and stories of years past, as well as the freshest news of the day. It is a credit to America that there exists a place where a man can go, regardless of how poor he may be, to study and use the internet with ease, no matter his race, class, or creed. Imagine a world where the books or free internet are not easily accessible. We'd be relying upon word of mouth to solve our everyday problems and would therefore be vulnerable to dangerous mistakes. What good would a hospital be without the medical books that hold the cures? What good would a courthouse be without the law books that hold the system in check? Literature is essential in preserving our past, so that we might have some hope for our dreams of the future. This is why I argue for the importance of the library, because without the preservation and study of literature, we are in danger of becoming a culture enslaved by our own ignorance. Unfortunately, the love of literature seems to have increasingly diminished over the years. Our founding fathers recognized the essential importance of literature in contemporary society to ensure a successful and free country. They required a school to be within walking distance of every town within the 13 colonies. Unsurprisingly, America quickly became one of the most literate countries in the world. How different America looks today. What was once one of the most literate countries in the Western world is now one of the least. I can see two predominant reasons for this. Firstly, few people today see the value in recreational reading. This is because the emphasis of modern education has shifted. Once children were taught to think and process through use of the dialectic, a method of education exemplified by Plato, utilizing discussion, reading, and writing, whereas now children are taught almost entirely through memorization and teaching for the test. Students are told to consume and regurgitate facts and figures rather than internalize and truly learn them. If we were to internalize as opposed to just memorize, we would be far better off. For when something is internalized, it is held onto by far more than just the intellect. It is held onto by the soul, which enriches the student in a way that memorization alone never can. The second reason America is now so poorly educated is because the point of modern education is to learn and achieve a measurable perceived goal, rather than to better oneself, an A average as opposed to a whole soul. This is taught early on through the method of testing. Children are told that the measure for a well-educated mind is an A average. They go on to see all of life in this light. You don't study so that you'll learn to think well and love goodness. You study to get an A. You get an A so you'll go to a fine college so you'll get a good job so you can retire comfortably. But there you are, you've died without ever really living. This is why literature is so important. It's very hard to read without thinking. When you engage in reading, you engage in a formative way that is generally lacking in film or lecture. When a person reads something good, they are made more receptive and knowledgeable. In society, if we were returned to loving and valuing literature, we could only become better and better. In order to reverse the growing problems in America's educational system, action must be taken and soon. It is necessary for a shift to occur in the values of America as a whole, away from instant gratification and toward learning for the sake of active minds and whole souls. I believe this can be achieved through use of the dialectic. In discussion, students will be able to learn to work through and defend their beliefs, all the while becoming more resolute in their convictions. Through reading, they'll be able to hold on to one thought for long periods of time, several weeks as opposed to a day. Through writing, they'll become more articulate and mature in the way that they express their thoughts. If we can reinstate the dialectic into our educational systems, then we can raise up a new generation of scholars who are dedicated to the preservation of and search for goodness, truth, and beauty. Considering all I've said today, it is clear that America is in more than just a literary crisis. The less a man can read, the more he's enslaved by his own ignorance. A change must happen, and soon. If the educational system of America can return to what the likes of our founding fathers and Plato envisioned, then we might be saved. If a love of learning can be reinstated within the hearts of America's students, then we might turn toward improvement. In a time of economic recession and geopolitical uncertainty, it is all the more important that we know ourselves and know our country. If we can become a country that knows its mistakes and failures and is able to use those to strengthen and brighten its future, then why not try? The problem seems large, but the solution is simple. Much could be made right if only more of our citizens would do as Frederick Douglass did and pick up a book. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
I like what you said about how instead of that education has leaned toward measurables instead of studying to think well and love goodness. I like that phrase. So throw out a sort of left field question for you. What is a book, and don't give me a cop out like the Bible or something like that, that if everyone in this room wants to be educated, this is a book that we should all read and grapple with and understand?
That's such a hard question. I think my two favorite books currently that I think they're my favorite because I feel you can read them again and again and only become a better person each time, which I haven't even finished. I'm reading East of Eden right now, which I think grapples, it's accessible. People love it because it really deals with the suffering of humanity in a way that is beautiful but is also true. And my all-time favorite book is Descent into Hell by Charles Williams, which I feel like it has dangerous thoughts in it, but it also has really true thoughts that there is so much more to this world and to human interaction than what people like to think. I just choose those because they're my favorite books, but I think you can't read those and not somehow come out improved and with a wider view of humanity.
So Douglass in his book, there was in a sense an antagonistic. There was an antagonist being, I think, at the time it was, I think he called out whites, for not educating, the black students and wanting to kind of keep them under. So who do you see now as kind of the antagonistic in the education system that you said is broken?
Well, I've encountered almost every format available for education as a child, mostly just because I keep being dissatisfied and choosing a new one. And I was most horrified in the public schooling system. No one be offended if you attend public school. But just the fact that they don't, and this is such a blanket statement, so it's probably not true at all, but I felt like...
Own it! Own it!
I felt like every student was told that you only know things if you can get a good grade, and that's not true. And I spent I want to be a PPE major, but history is my passion. And I feel like in history class, I was my teacher's least favorite student. And it was because I'd go up to her and say, who's your favorite president? She'd be like, I don't have a favorite president. And I was like, why are you a history teacher? But it was AP, so she was prepping us for this standardized test. And I felt like it was so dishonest to say that if you do well on these kind of quizzes and these kind of tests, then you really know history. And I think the only reason I did well is because I genuinely love history and really wanted to learn it and go out of my way to read historical novels. And it's just wrong to say that if you can do well on an SAT, you are the best educated of all the people, because that's not true. Not that if you're lazy, you're better educated.